AA guns. Are they worth buying? Let's find out. The rules for how AA guns work depends on which version of the game you're playing. I haven't played every version of Axis&Allies, but from what I've gathered, there are two main sets of rules for how they work. The first and original set of rules are, in a nutshell, defending AA guns fire one shot for each and every enemy air unit making an attack in that territory, whether it be against land units or industrial complexes. They cannot be taken as a casualty, but can be captured by the enemy. They cost 5 IPCs, or 6 in Anniversary Edition, and use the generic AA gun sculpt for all nations. There are some slight rule variations depending on the version you're playing. The other, more recent set of rules for AA guns are as follows. Defending AA guns may fire up to 3 shots each, but only ever 1 shot per enemy air unit, regardless of how many AA guns are present. They can be taken as a casualty and cannot be captured. They usually cost 5 IPCs, and every nation has their own distinct, and might I say awesome, AA gun sculpt. In both sets of rules, AA guns can only defend, and they fire only at the start of the very first round of combat, providing there are enemy air units attacking the territory, with any dice rolls of a 1 eliminating an air unit immediately without a chance to return fire. Now, if we're considering building one or more AA guns, then it probably means our priority is to dig in and defend a key area. And I would say we have 4 real units to choose from to help us in our defense, depending of course on our budget, factory production limits, the situation at hand, and what our longer term plans are. But I think the simplest way to evaluate the effectiveness of AA guns is to compare their defensive power to that of infantry, which are bang for buck the best unit on defense. So let's break this down with a particular focus on the newer and, in my opinion, better AA gun rules. Rolling 1 dice, an AA gun has a 16.6% chance to score a hit. Rolling 2 dice, a 30% chance to score at least 1 hit. And with all 3 shots rolled, there's a 42% chance of at least 1 hit being scored. A defending infantry, on the other hand, has a 1 in 3 chance to hit in every round it survives. 2 AA guns for $10 can roll up to 6 dice at 1. Statistically, that should be 1 hit, which means the enemy loses at worst a fighter, also worth $10. 3 infantry for $9, roll 3 dice at 2. Again, statistically, that should be 1 hit, most likely assigned to a more expendable unit. On paper, AA guns seem like pretty well balanced and decent units, but of course there's a key difference between infantry and AA guns. AA guns fire preemptively and directly at expensive air units. Should the AA gun hit, that air unit is immediately gone forever, and any hits that the air unit might have scored no longer happen, meaning that the AA gun has not only knocked out a plane, but over the course of multiple rounds possibly saved the lives of multiple friendly units, surely impacting the outcome of the battle in a major way. An infantry hit won't have this same level of impact because their hits will always be assigned to a cheaper unit of the enemy player's choosing. On the other hand, should the AA gun miss, and there's a good chance it will, the only thing that AA gun can do to help in the battle is to be used as an expensive 5 IPC piece of cannon fodder. Meanwhile, an infantry will continue to roll in every round of combat, possibly scoring multiple hits. So while AA guns seem fairly well balanced, I think we should have a look and see what the odds calculator reckons. Now, I think it's fair to assume that if we're the ones getting attacked and the enemy is willing to commit a significant portion of his air force to the battle, then our chances of victory are probably not favourable. Take this simple example. The attacker already has the advantage, but will need to bring in some air power to gain overwhelming odds. Notice that as we move down the rows here, the number of attacking fighters increases, but the odds in each of these examples remains roughly the same due to added defending tanks. Now, I've added these tanks to the defending side to keep the base odds stable in each of these examples, and that will allow us to more easily compare the added power of 1 AA gun to that of 1 infantry, as well as compare the difference in odds when the AA gun fires 1, 2 and 3 shots. On the other side, we've got the exact same setup except with bombers. So what's better in these examples? 1 AA gun or 1 infantry? Well, it turns out that there is no statistically significant difference between 1 AA gun and 1 extra infantry defending against a single air unit, at least in these examples. However, the more shots an AA gun gets to fire, the better the overall odds become for the defending side. No surprise there. An added AA gun that gets to fire all 3 shots gives the defender considerably better odds than an added infantry. 1 AA gun seems to be better than 1 infantry, assuming the attacking force contains at least 1 air unit, but this isn't really fair considering the price difference between an AA gun and an infantry. 2 infantry comfortably beats 1 AA gun regardless of the number or type of attacking air units in these examples. So let's repeat the experiment with a slightly more even playing field. 10 IPCs for 2 AA guns or 3 infantry for 9. That's up to 6 shots at 1 versus 3 shots at 2. And let's also increase the number of units on each side. And I'm going to represent them like this now to save space. Same deal as before, we're going to increase the number of attacking fighters one by one, keeping the base odds stable by adding a defending tank for each added fighter. So, at what point are we better off with AA guns in these examples? Well, it turns out that we're not, because the infantry just about provide the best odds in all of these examples. Repeating the experiment with bombers has little to no impact on the outcomes. Infantry are statistically better at winning battles than AA guns overall, although the difference in odds is marginal in examples where the AA guns get to fire all of their shots. But what about this example? It's the big battle for Moscow. Germany is coming in next term with a huge army, including 15 planes. Russia is well dug in, but only has 3 AA guns. With only 10 IPCs to spend, what should the Russians buy? 2 more AA guns so that they get the max of 15 initial AA rolls instead of just 9? Or should they build 3 extra infantry? And while we're here, why don't we compare the odds of adding an extra fighter or an extra tank and artillery? As it stands, the Germans have just about an 80% chance to win. So which of these 4 options gives the Russian defender the best chance to emerge victorious? And which do you think gives the worst chances? I'll give you a couple of seconds. Of course, the best option is the infantry, but the actual difference in this example between the AA guns and 3 infantry is only around 2 or 3% according to the odds calculator, which is negligible. And interestingly, the worst option is actually the fighter. So far, the odds for the defender haven't been too bad in the examples shown, but in a more seemingly hopeless situation similar to this, and depending of course on your playstyle, you might switch focus from maximising already feeble chances of victory to maximising the amount of damage you can inflict to the enemy on the way down. And in this case you might argue that AA guns are better than infantry, even if the average odds favour infantry for the best outcome, because there's that chance you could inflict devastating, potentially tide-turning losses that could make a real difference to the outcome of the battle, and perhaps even in extreme cases, the outcome of the entire game. In big battles like these, a lot comes down to those initial AA gun rolls. In this example, the attacking force has about 90% chances of victory, but look how their chances drop with 1 or more planes lost to AA fire. Now let's have a look at the original rules for AA guns. We already know that the more shots an AA gun gets to fire, the better the overall chances of victory will be for the defending side. And this is even more relevant for the original AA gun rules, which can fire an unlimited number of shots. So if the enemy brings in 100 air units to the battle, then 1 AA gun will fire 100 shots. So whether or not these AA guns are worth it for 5 IPCs depends even more so on how many aircraft the enemy has, and how many you anticipate being brought into battle against you. But how do they compare to infantry? Or more specifically, how many shots does an original AA gun need to fire before it starts to outperform infantry? Let's find out. And we'll do so by repeating the experiment from earlier on. Once again, a series of simple 50-50 battles, and as we make our way down the rows, you'll notice the increasing numbers of fighters as well as defending tanks to keep those base odds stable. So at what point in these examples, if at all, are we better off with an AA gun instead of an infantry? Once again, I'll give you a couple of seconds to take this in. And as I reveal the results, we can see that one infantry is statistically better than one AA gun up until the AA gun gets to fire 6 shots, at which point the AA gun begins to slightly outperform the infantry, at least on average. And of course, the performance of an AA gun does get better the more attacking air units it gets to fire at. Take this example with 10 attacking fighters. And just out of interest, it doesn't really make much difference if we repeat the experiment with bombers. But bear in mind that AA guns usually cost 5 or 6 IPCs, whereas an infantry is only 3, so again, this isn't really fair. So in this final experiment, I added fighters and bombers in a 2-to-1 ratio to the attacking force to see at what point an AA gun gives the defending sides better chances of victory when compared to adding 2 infantry units instead of just 1. Does this make the experiment completely fair? Not really, but it does demonstrate how poor the performance of AA guns can be when compared to basic infantry units. The break-even point for AA guns in these examples is here. That's 12 attacking air units. Original AA guns are inefficient statistically. In order for the AA gun to give a defending force better chances of victory than infantry, the enemy needs to bring in, frankly, a ridiculous number of air units. But what's funny is I'm kind of wasting my time here, because if there's this many air units involved in the battle, then it's probably happening in a capital city or somewhere else of key importance, in which case there'll already be an AA gun present. Most powers start the game with more than enough AA guns to last them for the game, and therefore will never need to build any more. I think one of the main reasons to build a new AA gun is to protect newly built far-out industrial complexes from bombing raids, since factories in the games which use original AA gun rules tend not to come with their own inbuilt AA defences. I'm sure there are situational reasons to build a new AA gun with the original rule set. For example, Germany might want an extra AA gun to keep in France, but most of the time you're probably going to be better off putting the IPCs towards something else, something which won't be at risk of falling into enemy hands, something which you can actually use in your own turns, and something whose usefulness isn't completely reliant upon the movements of your enemy. I think that's just about all I have to say about the original rules for AA guns, so from here on out I'll be referring to the newer rule set. So in comparing their relative cost and power, AA guns are weaker than infantry, less reliable, and give less overall chances of victory in a given battle according to the odds calculators, even if they get to fire all of their shots. Though in some calculations this difference has been shown to be marginal. There is always an element of luck when rolling any dice in Axis&Allies, but this is especially true with AA guns, considering how high the stakes can be. A lucky AA roll can completely change the course of a battle, but the same is true if the AA guns get unlucky rolls. The chance an AA gun will score multiple hits is very slim, as you can see here. I mean, think of it this way. If an AA gun roll has a 16.6% chance to hit, that means the air unit has an 83.3% chance to survive. Logically, you need to roll 6 dice to deserve one AA hit, but the mathematical chance of rolling at least one hit with 6 dice is, believe it or not, only actually about 66%. That said, however improbable, I've had multiple planes shot down on many different occasions actually. In this example, I had 6 out of 9 planes shot down by one AA gun. The chance of 6 out of 9 AA hits is 0.1%. And I'm sure many of you feel my pain. Most of us have experienced similar levels of AA gun devastation, and if you haven't yet, it's coming. These potentially catastrophic tide-turning losses are a unique game changer that only AA guns are capable of inflicting. And although infantry have been shown to be the more reliable unit, there are good reasons to favour AA guns. One of the AA gun's main strengths is already at play before any battle, and that is to mess with your enemy's head. Personally, AA gun rolls are among the most intense moments of any game, even in relatively small battles. I always hold my breath during AA fire, and I feel like I'm not the only one who feels this way. Well-placed AA guns can really psych out an opponent and force them to make the difficult decision of whether or not they're willing to gamble with their precious planes. Of course, players with a more aggressive playstyle will be more immune to the psychological effects of AA guns, but other more cautious players may be forced to re-evaluate their options. Bringing in more tanks and artillery instead of air units to help sway the odds could be a good option for a would-be attacker, but unlike air units, tanks and artillery must remain in the attack territory following victory. They can't non-combat back to safety like air units can, and may therefore be left vulnerable to enemy counterattacks. The presence of an AA gun may therefore put certain players off from attacking a territory altogether. In this example of Barbarossa, Russia will gladly retake territories where Germany is weak, usually with some infantry and planes. These tactics can slow down the German forces and distract them from their main objectives. But if the German player had the foresight to bring in AA guns to the front line, well, now this exchange is much less attractive for the Russian player. Will Russia risk losing precious planes for the sake of a couple of infantry? So while AA guns are an exclusively defensive unit, they can actually be used to help in the grander scheme of an offensive. AA guns can also hinder or even prevent strafing attacks, which is when the attacker's goal isn't to capture a territory, but rather to inflict as many casualties as possible in 1 or 2 rounds before retreating. If the bulk of the attacking heavy hitters consists of air units, and there are AA guns present, then this tactic might not be as viable for the attacker. Whatever the circumstances, attacking an AA gun with air units is never a decision made lightly, and is always a tense moment for both sides, and that extra PTSD-inducing pressure is unique only to AA guns. That all said, AA guns do have quite a few considerable weaknesses. They have zero offensive capability, they have the least mobility, they can't be moved by transports during the combat phase, they are limited to defensive land battles only, they are the second most expensive land unit, and they are reliant upon the enemy attacking with air units in order for them to actually function. And the attacker needs to bring in exactly 3 times the number of air units for each AA gun present in order to get the maximum benefit from each AA gun. Infantry, on the other hand, are the cheapest, most cost-effective and reliable defensive land unit statistically. They can attack, and when paired with artillery, they become the cheapest and most cost-effective offensive land unit. They can also be moved by transports freely, and they always roll in battle regardless of the presence of enemy air units. You'll always have use for infantry whether you're on the offensive or defensive. With AA guns, however, once you gain the initiative, you may never need those AA guns ever again. So in terms of practicality, infantry are generally the better option, all things considered, further supporting the conclusion that infantry are better than AA guns. But are AA guns worth buying? In my opinion, yes, so long as the situation calls for it. Obviously, spamming AA guns is going to get you nowhere, and admittedly, most of the time you're probably not going to need to build many AA guns, since most powers already start the game with a generous amount, and so it's not uncommon for entire games to be played out without a single AA gun being purchased anywhere. But because they're so situational, I think a lot of players forget that they even have the AA gun available to them. Some players even forget about the AA guns they start the game with, which end up just sitting in their starting territories for the entire game, scratching their arses. I can recall a few instances where building an AA gun has been a great idea, but admittedly these instances have been few and far between, and so for the vast majority of the time you'll probably be better off building something else with those $5. But that's just my opinion. What are your thoughts on AA guns? And is there anyone out there that's had worse experiences with AA guns than me? It's 6 out of 9 planes shot down to beat. I'm sure we've all got an AA gun horror story to share, so feel free to do so in the comments. Thanks so much to Contango for extensively sharing his thoughts and ideas with me on the topic of this video. A lot of the info in this video would not have been presented without his input, and I appreciate it so much. Thanks to everyone over at Axis&Allies.org. I found quite a few posts discussing AA guns, which gave me a lot of inspiration to make this video. Thanks to David Skelly for the odds calculator. This video would not have been possible without these incredibly useful tools. And as always, thanks to you for watching.